Hello, I'm Drew Roth, a senior here at Humboldt State University. Today, we'll be showing you the efforts of the students in Dr. Reitzel's Fall Semester 2019 Communication 490, the Capstone experience, in creating and performing a manuscript speech as part of the Communication Perspectives project. We hope you enjoy the fruits of many hours of research in speech writing and come away enlightened by the topics we wish to shed light on.
The other day, my friend asked me why I'm always happy or why I'm always smiling. I think the last time they saw me cry was a few years ago. Hi, my name is Jenny Martinez. I'm a communications major at HSU. I also would like to take the time to tell you that there is a trigger warning. I will be mentioning suicide, so please take the time to pause this video or exit. Now, I know most of us have been going out through the years and we finally realize that we're surrounded by negativity. And for some reason, we can't cut it out of our lives or it's just simply there. Well, I came across an article by Sue Hanfield with the title, Brilliant Positive Thinking, Transform Your Optimism and Confidence to Look Out in Business. Now, she had one of the questions that we asked the most. What happens when things go wrong? Well, she gave me an answer to the same question. Now, mentioning that life is full of unfortunate events, moments of grief, and moments of loss. But just because this is part of our lives does not mean we have to have the mentality to say, maybe more luck next time. So with that being said, I would like to tell you that it is okay to have a moment and take a breath. It is okay to stop and breathe. It's okay to think about yourself and take care of it, because you need to recover in order to continue. It might take days, it might take weeks, it might take hours, but you will recover and feel better. Now, my life changed in a weekend. I basically came back home after being out of town for a whole week. On a Saturday morning, my things were packed. A ticket to California was purchased. I was 14 years old, but I knew what I wanted. If it was the best choice for me, maybe not. So I decided to take all those goals and accomplish them here. Now, when I decided to come to Humboldt State University, I took an English class. And well, at the end of the semester, we had to turn in a portfolio. I was really scared if I had the proper English, if I was going to be good at it, if maybe it was not my thing. So when I turned it in, my worst fear came true. I failed. Now I came across an article by Barry Mayer with the title, Filling the Glass with Obstacle Thinking, the Guide to Positive Thinking in Business. It mentioned that even if we have long or short goals, it will be enough to motivate you. It will be enough to keep you going, to give your best. It also tells us that if we have many talents, we have to take advantage of that. Now, with that being said, don't you ever think or realize that when you put effort in an assignment, it actually turns out to be pretty good? Or when you're trying to impress your crush, I would think that's the most relatable subject at this point. Now, as we continue, and as I already mentioned what happened in my class, in English class, I decided to put effort in the thing that I was afraid the most, which was if I was good enough or not. My dad was right. I knew what to do. I just needed to do it in English. Now, it also helps when you have goals like internal or external goals. I would like to say that in my last year of high school, a friend called me, and this is the moment I was told that my friend Ale took her life. The same day, my grandpa sat down with me and told me that he wasn't judging my friend, but her motivations were not the right ones. So, well, maybe my friend forgot that she had a bright future, that she was maybe our next president. I don't know. I don't know what was running through her mind. But I decided to take that moment and also think about that and let you know that if you have goals, to get your diploma in college, to prove wrong to those that told you that you are not good enough for something or for someone, or you're doing it for those that are not here anymore or do not have the opportunity as you do. First of all, congrats on having a goal. Congrats on keeping it going even when you think you can't. Now, before I go, I want to thank you for listening and respecting my stories today. I know it's hard to get out of bed when you have no energy. I know it's hard to stay positive when you're having a moment. But I know also as well that you are very well known of J.K. Rowling and her sequel, Harry Potter. These books really helped me a lot when I was going through so much. And I would like to share some wise words always said by the famous Albus Dumbledore. But happiness can be found even in the darkest of times, only if we remember to turn on the lights. If you go home, do it with a positive attitude. Don't let negativity beat you. And we know it's cousin with positivity, but does not mean you have to let him win you over. Now, another thing I would like to share, and like in 2003, in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, is always mentioned that the world isn't split between good or dead eaters. We all have light and dark inside us. What really counts is what side we decide to act on. That's who we truly are. Go show your light to someone. Maybe they actually need it. Thank you.
The term queer has had a very complicated history, the word evolving and adapting to fit a variety of situations and individuals. Hello, I'm Emilio Casteneda. David M. Halperin helps to shed light on the history of this significant term in his article, The Normalization of Queer Theory, when he states, and I quote, "Queer is such a simple, unassuming little word. Who could have ever guessed that we would come to saddle it with so much pretentious baggage and so many grandiose theories, political agendas, philosophical projects, and apocalyptic meanings? A word that was once commonly understood to mean strange, odd, unusual, abnormal, or sick, and was routinely applied to lesbian and gay men as a term of abuse, now intimates possibilities so complex that entire volumes are devoted to spelling them out." End quote. Barker 2016 exposes the origins of the term queer in the line, "The original meaning of queer in 16th century English-speaking countries referred to something strange or illegitimate, as in, they're not queer as folk, or being queer street, meaning someone having financial difficulties." This line shows that the word did indeed come from a negative sense of usage, the word only becoming more positive in context in more recent times due to the reclamation of it. The movement of reclaiming the word queer is one fueled by LGBT activism, which had its beginnings in the timeframe of the 1980s when a prominent group made up of queer individuals began handing out flyers with the word printed on it to those around them. The reclamation was an attempt to take the word and possibly change it into a more pleasant or neutral word. The reclamation of the word also spawned the formation of a particular school of thought, queer theory. Queer theory is described by Halperin in 2003 as being a positive outcome of the reclamation of the term queer by the community by explaining its importance when he states, "Queer theory has effectively reopened the questions of the relations between sexuality and gender, both as analytic categories and as lived experiences. It has created great opportunities for transgender studies. It has pursued the task begun long before within the sphere of gay and lesbian studies of detaching the critique of gender and sexuality from narrowly conceived notions of lesbian and gay identity. This field of study has created doorways into new methods of thinking in regards to an individual's sexuality or gender, creating new opinions and thoughts on the labels that have hung over our heads for so long and possibly changing them to have a more positive connotation through continuing thought and debate." Queer theory began to rise in popularity after its introduction in the 1990s by a woman known as Teresa de la Ratis, during a conference in which she is quoted by author Jaeger Seidman, Queer Theory, stating that the school of thought is necessary, critical work of deconstructing our own discourses and what they silence. As the first person to name the field to study this, Teresa was met by many critics who brought to question the fact that she was coining a phrase with roots in discrimination and prejudice to the people the research would try to understand. Modern-day queer theory has evolved alongside man as we have continued to explore what we feel inside of ourselves and in regards to our own sexuality and gender. The narrative that began amongst intellectuals due to the introduction of queer theory in the 80s has truly expanded, in which we think of heteronormative structure in which we all live in and our place in or outside of it. The practice of studying queer theory owes most of its success to the reclamation of the term queer by LGBT activists during their efforts to rebel against the discrimination they faced before non-heteronormative behavior was considered more regular or normal. In our current political atmosphere, the study of queer theory is able to explain and observe much more due to the fact that people are more inclined to see lifestyles which stray from their version of normal. Individuals in our generation feel a sense of liberation and freedom to express themselves, which was not all present during the formation of the school of study. More people coming out as non-straight than ever recorded before. Gia Piantato, in her article entitled, "How Has Queer Theory Influenced the Way We Think About Gender?" discusses the way in which queer theory has aided us in understanding sexuality and gender in the quote, "The contribution of queer theory in redefining gender identity by complicating its previous understanding provided by gender theory is undeniable. Queer theory defeats the binarism between men and women categories and consequently between male and female biological sex and heteronormative and homosexuality and the atomic link between these notions. It considers gender and sex both socially and culturally constructed and refuses the idea that sexuality is organized around heterosexual and homosexual dichotomy. It is clear that this constant transformation and expansion of the approaches to gender and sexuality show the increasing attention that has been given with regard to both these issues in the last 5 decades, but also the dynamic nature of both sexuality and the political organizing that has developed around it. This line elaborates on how exactly we have learned from this direction of research and queer culture. With many of the things we had known before being replaced or erased as new knowledge begins to surface, Piantato 2016 also argues how important the reclamation of the word queer was to studying and understanding no heteronormative sexualities, stating, "It is clear that this constant transformation and expansion of the approaches to gender and sexuality show the increasing attention that had been given with regard to both these issues in the last 5 decades, but also the dynamic nature of both sexuality and the political organizing that has developed around it." This line refers to the gay liberation movement in the 1970s and the understanding of queer people up to our current date. So to conclude, the LGBT community has had a very interesting history, many filled with struggles to obtain human rights in the eyes of their government and the world around them. These struggles have resulted in many interesting developments in the community which may have seemed impossible at one point. One example of this is the equal marriage law, which was passed in the Supreme Court of summer of 2015. This law passed with a 5-4 decision with 5 in favor and 4 against, which resulted in marriage equality between the same sexes. This development was only made possible through the cumulative efforts of activist groups throughout the course of LGBT history. Despite arguments made as to why the reclamation of queer is a negative thing, there have been many positive results from this movement. The reclamation of the word led to the creation of what would be known as queer theory, a field of study which seeks to investigate sexuality and gender in all aspects, which has benefited the community greatly. Advances in this field have resulted in many words and phrases being reorganized to fit our new understanding, breaking down the proverbial limits that had been set for ourselves by stating that research on sexuality and gender would not evolve as time went on. The war on whether or not the term queer should be used is still ongoing to this day, both sides bringing up passionate and well-thought-out arguments which show their personal feelings on the topics, but the amount of positive results which give their thanks to the act is not negotiable. The strides made in queer theory and in overall feelings of acceptance due to the usage of words clearly visible to anyone willing to open their eyes.
Have you ever left the coffee shop thinking you had just engaged in a myth? Hi, my name is Robbie Ippolito. I'm guessing your answer to that question is probably no. But from the perspective of communication theory, modern-day practices like going to Starbucks contain just as much mythology as an ancient Greek textbook. Visiting a coffee shop is a centuries-old practice with a great deal of communication going on beneath the surface. To explain my interpretation of this practice, I'll borrow theories from 2 well-known communication scholars, Roland Barthes and Kenneth Burke. And I'll also briefly address the history of the practice as it provides important background for the modern-day coffee house. Finally, I'll explain why this practice relies on storytelling, whiteness, and capitalism to construct its perceived value as a practice meant for civil, intelligent, and affluent participants. French philosopher Roland Barthes wrote about his contemporary understanding of mythology, suggesting that myths are constructed using already existing symbols, and that new meaning is attached to those symbols, resulting in 2 different channels of meaning, first order and second order. The first order of meaning is linked to a signifier, while the second order is linked to what's signified. For example, the symbol of a cup of coffee in the first order is literal. It represents the drink itself. While the symbol's second order meaning is linked to energy, productivity, and socialization. Robert Wicks, author of Modern French Philosophy from Existentialism to Postmodernism, wrote that Barthes revealed mythic expression to be an ideological tool of the prevailing bourgeois capitalist system, meaning that Barthes believed the second order meaning of a symbol is curated in order to benefit the prevailing class. He saw structuralism in language itself and implied that because we are limited to an imposed set of terminologies, we're also limited to an imposed set of understandings. Kenneth Burke saw things similarly. He coined the term terministic screens to describe the process through which meaning is imposed. He wrote in his 1989 book on Symbols and Society that any nomenclature directs the attention into some channels rather than others. He suggested that terms simultaneously direct attention toward one definition and deflect attention away from other definitions, effectively screening for a predetermined meaning and limiting possible interpretations. The public perception of coffee houses has been subject to this kind of screening, as it's far removed from its geographical and cultural origins. Humans first consumed coffee in Ethiopia, where the Abyssinian people used the fruit as a food and a stimulant. The fruit seeds were later stolen and planted in European colonies, where native peoples were often enslaved to reduce the price of exporting the beans. Coffee houses became common in 18th century Europe, where they were seen as a place for high-class people and enlightened conversation. These locations earned the nickname penny universities, based on the price of a cup and the level of intelligent conversation which was expected. The story of the European coffee houses provides a historical backdrop for the construction of the practice's contemporary mythology. The first-order meaning of attending a coffee house is simply that the customer is there to purchase coffee. But there are several second-order meanings. One is that the customer is there to participate in the mythologized atmosphere reminiscent of the European coffee house, which implies the customer will engage in intelligent conversation, obey unwritten codes of civility, and attempt to maintain the space as a refuge from a less prestigious outside world. Measures that shop owners and marketers take to maintain this mythology include strategic interior design, as well as the choice, pricing, and naming of menu items, which frame the product as European, rare, and carefully crafted. These owners and marketers stand to gain from upholding the mythology because, as Wicks argued, the contents of modern myths frequently support the capitalistic system. While coffee itself has the inherent value of supplying energy to the consumer, its value is increased by making it a symbol of a romanticized past and of the consumer's economic status. That romanticized past of European tradition is carefully selected rather than the drink's history in the Middle East and Africa through the use of Burke's terministic screens. For proof, look at the menu at any given coffee house. Most espresso drinks have Italian-sounding names like cappuccino or latte, or even pseudo-Italian names like frappuccino that direct the attention of the consumer toward the Eurocentric version of history and deflect attention away from the ways that the drink arrived in Europe and was distributed. At Starbucks chains, even the names for their sizes are terministic screens. While ordering a large is something one can also do at McDonald's, ordering a venti is something specific to the refuge that Starbucks attempts to produce. Starbucks sizes direct attention toward an escapist narrative of Italian espresso drinks and deflect it away from the perceivably uglier American world of the extra large and the big gulp. Kristen Winnett, in From Street Food to Kitchens Toward a Feminist Rhetoric of Culinary Tourism, explained this act of culinary escapism, writing that it promotes nostalgic renderings of a past the consumer did not experience in an attempt to create distance from his or her white, in other words, blank, empty roots, and find deeper solace in another culture. Participation in this practice creates symbolic results beyond the surface level. The purchase of a drink, while holding inherent value, can also be seen as one transactionally punching their ticket into an exclusive, civilized refuge. The provision of internet access to customers is also both a practical and symbolic act, because not only does it convenience customers, but the fact that access is earned with the purchase of a drink suggests a nonverbal agreement between owner and patron to an implied behavioral standard. It's a silent nod to an unwritten rule that patrons will use the connection for an expected purpose, usually conducting business or completing schoolwork, which, when displayed in public, are symbolic performances of affluence. For contrast, at a public library, the internet is usually free but requires a public library account to be used because the same codes are not implied outside of the coffee house. In summary, people do not just spend their time at a coffee shop just to get their caffeine fix. From a communication theory perspective, they do it as a form of participation in an age-old tradition, a step away from white genericism, and a statement of one's own social position. Of course, none of this is to say that anyone should stop drinking coffee, only that there is much more to this cultural practice than meets the eye.
Hi, my name is Rachel Perry, and today my topic is asexuality. Even if you're not a part of the queer community, you're probably familiar with the initialism LGBTQ, the letters standing for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. This initialism is only representative of a part of the queer community, however, and a longer one, LGBTQIA+, includes even more sexual orientations and gender identities that aren't as well known or represented in popular culture. Today I am focusing on the A, which stands for asexuality. Some of you might not know much about asexuality, or you may not have even heard of it at all. So I'm going to provide you with a basic overview of what asexuality is and what asexuality is not. Defining asexuality can be difficult. Because the spectrum of asexuality is fluid and complex, there are many different ways to identify as asexual and perform asexuality. The Asexual Visibility and Education Network, or AVEN, defines asexuality as a lack of sexual attraction, meaning that asexual individuals do not experience, or very rarely experience, sexual attraction toward any person. To put that another way, asexual individuals have no sexual orientation. This does not mean, however, that asexual people can't or don't have romantic relationships. But in order for you to understand that, I first have to explain something called the split attraction model. The split attraction model, as explained by AVEN, states that some people experience sexual attraction and romantic attraction separately, and so might have different sexual and romantic orientations. While it is absolutely possible for some people to be both asexual and aromantic, experiencing neither sexual attraction nor romantic attraction, it is by no means the only expression of asexuality. As Kristen Scherer explains in her 2008 article, Coming to an Asexual Identity, Negotiating Desire, asexuality is distinct from aromanticism. And some asexual individuals do have romantic orientations and identity labels. For example, a person who experiences romantic attraction toward individuals of the same gender but who does not experience sexual attraction might label themselves homoromantic asexual. In order to understand many asexual identities, we must see romance and sex as two different types of intimacy, both experienced in different ways for different people. Finally, asexuality, like other sexual orientations, is a spectrum, not a binary, and there are many different ways to identify as asexual and perform asexuality. Aside from those asexual individuals with different romantic orientations, there are also people who identify themselves as being on the asexual spectrum and yet are not completely asexual nor completely allosexual. Such individuals may experience some sexual attraction, but rarely, and they might identify with labels such as demisexual or gray asexual. Now that I have given you a brief overview of what asexuality is, it's important to distinguish what asexuality is not. The first important point to acknowledge is that, similarly to many other sexual orientations, before asexuality was accepted as a valid sexual orientation, it was highly pathologized, and is still sometimes treated as a medical or mental issue today. According to Prowse and Graham, in their 2007 article, Asexuality, Classification and Characterization, asexuality has been conflated with hypoactive sexual desire disorder and sexual aversion disorder. Asexuality is no more a medical problem than any other sexual orientation, and yet, because of the sex-normative nature of Western culture, it's difficult for many people to accept that some people don't experience sexual attraction at all, and that it's not a cause for concern. Unfortunately, as Christina Gupta explains in her 2017 article on asexual marginalization and compulsory sexuality, the pathologization of asexuality has been harmful to the physical and mental well-being of many asexual individuals, both historically and contemporarily. The second distinction we must make is between asexuality and celibacy. If you recall, AVEN defines asexuality as a lack of sexual attraction. This is contrary to the definition of celibacy, where a person does experience both sexual attraction and the desire to act on it, but actively chooses not to based on their own moral or religious ideologies. In fact, as acknowledged by Poston and Baumel in their 2010 paper, Patterns of Asexuality in the United States, asexuality does not necessarily mean abstinence from sex or sexual activity. In her 2008 article, Kristen Scherer explains that while for some asexual individuals, their identity as asexual is contingent upon whether or not they engage in sexual activity, this is not true for all those who identify as asexual. Many asexual individuals have no desire for sex, but others might choose to engage in sexual activity for any number of reasons. Asexuality is not a new orientation. Its history is as long as ours, and yet it is only recently, with the emergence of internet communities, been acknowledged and had the language to be acknowledged as a valid identity. Here I have given you only a brief overview of the complex spectrum of asexuality, how asexuality has been conflated with medical problems, and how asexuality differs from celibacy. By its nature, asexuality disrupts binary thought and destabilizes the normalized assumption that everyone must be sexually oriented in one way or another. If you would like to learn more about asexuality and the asexual spectrum, I encourage you to visit the Asexual Visibility and Education Network at www.asexuality.org. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. This has been Comm Perspectives as part of the Capstone course in the Communication Department at Humboldt State University.